A shadow was falling across the pillars of American power, a long, cold shadow cast not by foreign enemies, but by the very men sworn to stand guard against them. In the heart of that encroaching darkness, one man, drunk on his own righteousness, was about to have his date with destiny. This is the chronicle of his reckoning. Smash that like button, subscribe, and bear witness to the moment the hunter became the hunted. The air inside the Hart Senate office building carried its usual Tuesday morning weight, a dense mixture of ambition, disinfectant, and the faint, papery scent of meticulously filed secrets. Congressman Adam Schiff, a figure sculpted by the elite corridors of Harvard Law and polished by the relentless friction of Washington, D.C., moved through the echoing marble halls with the serene confidence of a king surveying his domain. His own reflection, a fleeting specter in the polished granite, was that of a man at the zenith of his influence. The deep burgundy of his silk tie was a stark proclamation against the muted gray of the hallway, a banner of his absolute, unshakable authority. He was the chief architect of the modern political narrative, the man who had looked a sitting president in the eye and declared him a traitor without so much as a tremor in his voice. Today's agenda was simple: a routine oversight hearing with the FBI. It was another opportunity to perform for the cameras, to assert the dominance of his committee, and to publicly remind the nation's premier law enforcement agency precisely who held the reins of power. He swung open the heavy, ornate doors of Committee Room 216, his mind already crafting the sharp, memorable phrases that would dominate the evening news cycle. But the tableau before him was jarringly incorrect, a sudden, sharp dissonance in a well-rehearsed opera. The room was not just filled, it was suffocating. Beyond the usual gaggle of bored journalists and C-SPAN cameras, a forest of network television lenses bristled, their small red lights glowing with a predatory focus. And the security detail was heavy, unnervingly so. Stern-faced federal marshals, their jackets pulled tight across concealed body armor, stood like statues at every entrance and exit. Their presence was not for managing a crowd, it was for containing a threat. And then his eyes found him. Seated alone at the witness table, a space normally reserved for stammering bureaucrats and nervous agency heads, was Dan Bongino. He wasn't merely sitting, he was commanding the space, a tightly wound coil of raw, street-forged power that seemed to create its own gravitational field, pulling the very oxygen from the air. Bongino, the former NYPD officer, the ex-Secret Service agent, now the FBI's formidable deputy director, was a man Schiff regarded as a Neanderthal, a relic from a bygone era of brute force in a world that now demanded surgical precision. Bongino's eyes were fixed on Schiff, unblinking, predatory. It was the intense, focused stare of a wolf that has finally cornered the stag. A flicker of annoyance, the first faint prickle of genuine unease, traced its way down Schiff's spine. He adjusted his tie, a subconscious gesture of anxiety masked as a display of control, and made his way to the dais. He methodically arranged his papers, the familiar grounding ritual, a small comfort in a suddenly turbulent environment. Deputy Director Bongino, Schiff began, his voice imbued with the practiced, condescending authority that had served him for 2 decades. This is an unexpected honor. I assume you are here to provide the committee with an update on the Bureau's latest triumphs. He offered his trademark smile, a precisely calibrated weapon of disarming charm that had neutralized countless adversaries. It glanced off Bongino without effect. Bongino leaned into the microphone, his large hands bracketing a single imposing folder. It was bound in stark, crimson leather, embossed with 2 words that radiated menace. Classified, eyes only. Schiff's gaze sharpened. He could feel the story, his story, beginning to fray at the edges before he had even spoken the first line. There will be nothing routine about today's proceedings, Congressman. Bongino's voice was a low rumble, a sound honed not in the hallowed debating halls of the Ivy League, but on the unforgiving streets of Queens. Today is about a reckoning. Not the kind you script for your friends at MSNBC, the real kind. The room, already hushed, descended into an almost supernatural stillness. The electronic hum of the cameras seemed to roar into the vacuum of silence. Schiff felt the familiar surge of his prosecutorial instincts. Go on the offensive, discredit the witness, control the frame. That is a remarkably bold assertion, Deputy Director. Some might even characterize it as blatant insubordination. I have been conducting rigorous oversight of the FBI since you were wrestling junkies in a dark alley. The insult was designed to put Bongino back in his box, to re-establish the natural order of things. Bongino's smile was a thin, dangerous slash. And I have been risking my life to protect this country while you were auctioning it off piece by piece from your gated mansion in Potomac. So let's dispense with the charade, Adam. The use of his first name was a calculated breach of decorum, a deliberate act of shattering the established protocol. Schiff felt a hot flush of anger creep up his neck. This wasn't a hearing, it was a mugging. Before we proceed to your questions, Congressman, I need you to grasp something. Bongino's voice lowered, becoming intimate, almost conspiratorial, forcing every person in the room to lean forward. I have waited a very long time for this moment. Years of watching you and your cronies systematically poison the well of American democracy. Years of painstakingly gathering the proof of your betrayal. Betrayal. The word detonated in the silent room. A shocked gasp rippled through the gallery. Schiff's heart began to pound against his ribs, a frantic bird beating its wings against a cage of bone. He opened his mouth to unleash a furious denial, to condemn this ambush for the partisan theater it was. But Bongino's hand moved with slow, deliberate purpose to the crimson folder. You see, Adam, you walked in here this morning believing you were the Inquisitor, he said, his fingers tracing the stark, embossed letters. You thought this was your room, your show, but you are not the Inquisitor today. He paused, letting the silence amplify the weight of his next words. You are the accused. And this, he said, his voice dropping to a cold, hard whisper, is your judgment. With a soft, final rustle of leather, Bongino opened the folder. The ambush was complete. The trial had begun. Schiff's mind, a precision instrument honed over decades of legal combat and political warfare, was now a maelstrom of screeching, frantic thoughts. This was not a partisan attack. It was a meticulously planned execution broadcast live to the world. His entire career, his very identity, was built upon his mastery of the narrative, on being the one who posed the questions and thereby defined the truth. Now, he was the specimen pinned to the board, his legacy being vivisected in real time by a man he had so fatally misjudged. He could feel a cold bead of sweat trace a path down his temple, a humiliating betrayal by his own body. He had to seize back control. He reverted to the oldest weapon in the political playbook, procedural warfare. Mr. Chairman, he began, his voice an octave higher than he intended, a thin veneer of authority cracking under pressure. I must register a formal and strenuous objection to this grotesque pantomime. The Deputy Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation is exploiting a classified hearing to launch a defamatory, partisan character assassination. This is a flagrant abuse of his office. I move that we suspend these proceedings immediately. He scanned the faces of his Democratic colleagues on the committee, his eyes sending a silent, desperate plea for them to intervene, to extinguish this fire before it consumed him completely. But they were paralyzed, their expressions a cocktail of bewilderment and burgeoning fear. Their finely tuned political antennae were screaming at them to create distance from a man who was, in a matter of minutes, becoming politically radioactive. Bongino observed the pathetic appeal with an expression of cold, clinical pity. He allowed the silence to hang in the air, a suffocating blanket that amplified Schiff's desperation. "Your objection is noted for the record, Congressman," Bongino said, his tone utterly dismissive, "and it is overruled." He looked past Schiff, his gaze sweeping across the cameras, addressing the nation directly. For far too long, this man has hidden behind the shield of procedure. He has wielded the rule-book of this chamber as a weapon, while he methodically dismantled the rule of law itself. Today, that changes. Today, we discuss the truth. He tapped a single, manicured finger on the top document inside the crimson folder. "Let's begin with a simple query, Adam. A warm-up, if you will. Do you happen to recall a television appearance on Meet the Press on the 22nd of March, 2017? Schiff's memory, usually a steel trap, flashed with the scene. The glare of the studio lights, the earnest face of Chuck Todd, the unshakable confidence with which he had made his assertion. It was the foundational stone of the entire Russia narrative, the moment he had solemnly assured the American public that the evidence of collusion was not just circumstantial, but concrete and deeply troubling. It was, of course, a calculated fabrication, but a necessary one, a lie deployed in the service of what he considered a greater, more noble truth. He had repeated it so often, in so many venues, that it had taken on the weight of fact in his own mind. "Of course, I recall it," Schiff said, forcing a derisive snort. "I stated then that there was ample and compelling evidence of collusion, and I stand by that statement unequivocally today. The security of our democratic process was at stake." Bongino's smile was the slow, cruel curve of a predator who knows checkmate is inevitable. "Excellent," he purred, "because I would like to play for the committee and for the American people a recording. A recording that proves not only that you were lying, but that you were actively coordinating that lie with your partners in the media." He reached into his briefcase, not with a dramatic flourish, but with the unhurried, deliberate calm of a man who has already secured victory. He did not produce a piece of sophisticated FBI surveillance equipment. Instead, he pulled out a simple, off-the-shelf digital voice recorder, the kind a journalist might use for an interview. He held it aloft for the cameras to capture clearly. "Before I press play, Congressman, I want to make a brief point about tradecraft. You, the esteemed chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, the man entrusted with our nation's most guarded secrets, were conducting conversations of this sensitive nature on an open, unencrypted cellular line. That isn't merely arrogance, Adam. That is breathtaking incompetence." Schiff's face, already pale, blanched to a ghostly white. "Any unauthorized recording of a member of Congress is illegal surveillance," he shot back, his voice cracking under the strain. "That is a federal crime." Bongino's laugh was a harsh, grating sound that echoed in the silent room. "Son," he said, the word dripping with the condescension of a street cop lecturing a privileged amateur, "when you are actively conspiring with a CNN anchor to defraud the American public on a phone line that any half-decent teenage hacker could monitor, you have absolutely no reasonable expectation of privacy. That isn't a federal crime. That's just you being a fool." He pressed the play button. A voice, crystal clear and instantly recognizable, filled the chamber. It was Adam Schiff's own voice, saturated with a conspiratorial urgency. "Jake, listen to me carefully. Tomorrow morning, you have to lead the broadcast with the Russia story. I don't care what else is breaking. We must maintain the pressure." The response was just as clear. The familiar authoritative cadence of CNN's star anchor, Jake Tapper. "Adam, we're getting significant pushback here. The evidence simply isn't materializing. My best sources inside the Bureau are telling me it's a complete dead end." The recorded voice of Schiff sighed, a sound of profound, patronizing frustration. "Damn it, Jake. Don't you understand? The evidence is irrelevant. The narrative is what matters. The American people don't grasp nuance. They grasp headlines. You just need to report that a bombshell report is imminent and that sources indicate a secret channel to the Kremlin. Use the words treason and conspiracy. By the time anyone figures out it's all smoke and mirrors, we'll be past the midterm elections and firmly in control. The room exploded. A wave of outrage roared from the Republican side of the dais. A frantic, panicked scramble erupted among the Democratic staffers. The C-SPAN cameras zoomed in with merciless precision, capturing every minute detail of Schiff's face as it contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. His own words, his own cynical, arrogant contempt for the electorate, were lynching him in the public square. "Stop it!" he shrieked, his voice a raw, desperate plea that clawed at the air. "Turn that recording off. This is a deep fake. It's doctored." Bongino calmly pressed the stop button. He looked at Schiff, his eyes utterly devoid of emotion, save for a chilling, righteous certainty. "A deep fake, Congressman? Is that your official testimony? Because we have the world's most renowned audio forensic experts from the FBI's own laboratory at Quantico, who are prepared to testify under oath that this is, without question, your voice. We have the cell tower data that places both you and Mr. Tapper on this call at the precise time it was made. We have the phone records. So, I will ask you again, under penalty of perjury. Is it your testimony that the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the very agency you are tasked with overseeing, has fabricated this evidence to frame you?" Schiff was ensnared. To admit the recording was authentic was to confess to a massive fraud. To claim it was a fabrication was to accuse the FBI of a conspiracy so vast and audacious it defied belief. He was paralyzed, his brilliant legal mind short-circuiting. He could only stammer, This is taken entirely out of context." Bongino leaned back in his chair, a portrait of grim satisfaction. "The context, Congressman, is that you just admitted on tape to conspiring with the media to knowingly deceive the American people in order to influence the outcome of an election. And that, Adam," he said, his hand reaching for a second identical recorder, "is merely the opening act." The rustle of paper was the only sound that dared to break the profound silence. Inside that crimson folder lay a universe of damning secrets, and Adam Schiff could feel the immense gravitational pull of his own impending doom. His mind, once a fortress of legal strategy and rhetorical firewalls, was now a city under siege, its defenses crumbling from within. This was not an ambush. It was a public dissection. He could feel the collective gaze of the world upon him, the unblinking lenses of the cameras transmitting his every twitch, every bead of sweat, to an audience of millions. He was the unwilling star of a tragedy he had not written, the lead actor in a drama he had never seen coming. He had to regain the upper hand. He was Adam Schiff. He had faced down presidents, dismantled political dynasties, and orchestrated the narratives that shaped a nation. This man, this thuggish ex-cop with his cheap recorders, was nothing. "Mr. Bongino," he began, his voice a strained, fragile imitation of his usual confident baritone, "if this is your idea of a political bombshell, it is a pathetic and desperate gambit. This committee will not be held hostage by your partisan theatrics. Present your evidence, or I will have you removed from this chamber." Bongino looked up from the documents, his eyes filled with a chilling sort of pity. "A gambit, Congressman? A gambit is when you go on national television and tell the American people you have concrete evidence of Russian collusion that you know for a fact does not exist. This," he tapped a document with his forefinger, the sound sharp as a gunshot in the quiet room, "is justice." He slid a single sheet of paper from the folder. It was a meticulously typed transcript. "Let's continue with the warm-up, Adam. A simple test of your memory. March 22nd, 2017. You sat across from Chuck Todd. You looked directly into the camera, a perfect picture of solemn gravity, and you told the world you possessed more than circumstantial evidence of collusion. Do you recall that specific moment? Schiff's mind raced. It was a foundational lie, one of the first and most critical pillars of the narrative he had so painstakingly constructed over the years. He had repeated it so many times, with such conviction, that it had almost become true in his own mind. "Of course, I recall it," he said, forcing a dismissive, arrogant tone. "And I stand by that statement. The evidence was, and is, compelling." Bongino's smile was the last thing Schiff wanted to see. It was a smile of absolute certainty, the smile of a man who not only held all the cards, but was about to savor playing every single one. "Perfect," Bongino said softly, "because I would love to demonstrate to the American people just how compelling that evidence truly was." He reached down into the briefcase beside his chair, his movements unhurried, almost languid. He didn't produce a sleek, FBI-issued device. He pulled out a second, cheap plastic digital voice recorder, identical to the first. "Before I press play, Congressman, a quick lesson in operational security. When you're conspiring to commit sedition, it is generally considered a poor choice to do so on an open, unencrypted phone line. You have no reasonable expectation of privacy. That isn't illegal surveillance, Adam. That's just you being arrogant." Schiff's blood ran cold. Another recording? It was impossible. His communications were secure, weren't they? "Any recording of a member of Congress is a violation of federal law," he blustered, his voice rising in pitch. "You are presenting illegally obtained." Bongino cut him off, his voice sharp as a razor's edge. "Save it for your legal counsel, Congressman. You're going to need a very good one." He pressed the play button. The sound that filled the chamber was a thunderclap in the suffocating silence. It was Adam Schiff's own voice, rendered with perfect, damning clarity. "Jake, listen to me. The Russia story is losing its legs. We need a shot in the arm. I need you to go big with it tomorrow morning." The responding voice was instantly recognizable, the familiar cadence of CNN's star anchor, Jake Tapper. "Adam, what have you got? The well is running dry over here. We can't keep screaming, 'bombshell,' if there's no bomb." Schiff's recorded voice was impatient, condescending. "It doesn't matter what we have. It matters what people think we have. Run with the narrative. Secret back channels to the Kremlin. Use words like explosive and walls closing in. The base will devour it. The American people are too stupid to know the difference anyway. Just keep the pressure on." A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. It was the sound of a god falling from Olympus. The camera zoomed in on Schiff's face, a canvas of disbelief and horror. His own words, his own cynical contempt for the public, echoed in the chamber of power. He was exposed, naked, his carefully crafted persona of a noble public servant shredded in an instant. "Stop it!" Schiff choked out, lunging forward in his chair, as if he could physically seize the sound from the air. "Turn it off! This is a deep fake, a complete fabrication." Bongino calmly pressed the stop button. He looked at Schiff, his expression unreadable. "A fabrication, Congressman? It sounds exactly like you. But don't worry, I have more." He reached back into the briefcase and produced a third recorder. "This one is even better. This is you, 1 week later, speaking with the special counsel himself, Robert Mueller. You were growing concerned that he wasn't finding the evidence you needed, so you decided to provide him with some motivation." Schiff was on his feet now, his chair scraping loudly against the marble floor. "You cannot play a conversation with the special counsel. That is privileged communication." "There is no privilege when you are committing obstruction of justice, Adam," Bongino said, his voice dropping to an icy calm. He pressed play. Mueller's weary, conflicted voice filled the room. "Adam, I've told you repeatedly, the evidence simply isn't there. We are chasing shadows." Schiff's response was brutal, the voice of a mob boss, not a statesman. Robert, let me be blunt. Your job isn't to find the truth. Your job is to find a crime. The American people need a villain. You will give them one. Create the narrative. Find the evidence. Do whatever it takes. Or I will personally dismantle your reputation and your legacy brick by brick. I have the votes in the Senate to end you. Do not test me. The recording ended. The silence that followed was heavier, more profound than before. This wasn't just media collusion. This was a direct threat against the integrity of the justice system itself. Schiff stood trembling, his face ashen, his knuckles white where he gripped the table. The prosecutor had become the accused, and the evidence was his own voice, his own soul laid bare for the world to see. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He was drowning in the silence, his entire world collapsing in slow motion. Bongino leaned back, the picture of calm. "That, Congressman," he said, his voice resonating with cold fury, "is not a witch hunt. That is a confession." The confession hung in the air, a toxic cloud that poisoned the very atmosphere of the room. Adam Schiff's mind, once a fortress of legal strategy and rhetorical firewalls, was now a city under siege, its defenses crumbling from within. He was no longer thinking about political spin or damage control. He was thinking about the cold, hard reality of iron bars and the crushing weight of disgrace. His entire career, his life's work, had been built on the perception of moral authority. In less than 10 minutes, Dan Bongino had demolished that foundation, leaving him exposed on a precipice of his own making. He sank back into his chair, the movement stiff and robotic. His hands were trembling, a betrayal his mind could not suppress. He clasped them together on the table, a desperate attempt to still their tremor. But it was useless. The cameras would see. Everyone would see. He had to find a way out, a legal argument, a procedural flaw, anything. Where did you get these?" he stammered, the question a hoarse whisper. It was a fatal mistake, a tacit admission of the recording's authenticity, but his panic was too great to see the trap. Bongino's eyes glinted with the satisfaction of a master interrogator who has just elicited the crucial slip. "I'm so glad you asked, Adam," he said, his voice smooth as silk. He gestured towards the stenographer. "For the record, let it be noted that the congressman has not denied the content of the recordings, only questioned their origin, thereby implicitly confirming their validity." Schiff felt a jolt as if from a cattle prod. He had walked right into it. He was confessing in real time, his own legal training turned against him. "That's not—" "I object," he blurted out, the words clumsy and hollow. "Object to what, Congressman?" Bongino countered. "To your own words? To the truth?" He leaned forward, his expression hardening. "You want to know where I got them? I got them from you, from your personal iPhone, the one you thought was your private little playground to coordinate with your media lackeys and plot your conspiracies." An audible gasp swept through the gallery. The revelation was so simple, so mundane, yet so utterly devastating. The architect of a vast political conspiracy brought down by his own consumer electronics. "You see, Adam, you're a creature of habit," Bongino continued, his tone now that of a lecturer dissecting a specimen. "You love the sound of your own voice so much that you forgot to turn off the voice memos app. It just kept recording, meeting after meeting, call after call. And every night, like a good little tech user, your phone would automatically back itself up to the iCloud." He paused, letting the full horror of the implication sink in. A federal judge, citing evidence of an ongoing criminal conspiracy, granted us a warrant for that iCloud account. Apple was more than happy to comply. It turns out they're not big fans of treason. He gestured to the crimson folder. "We have everything, Adam. 47 phone calls between you and the media, meticulously planning which lies to tell the American people. Transcripts of you coaching so-called whistleblowers. memos outlining strategies to create evidence. Schiff felt a wave of nausea. His entire secret history, his shadow career as a master manipulator, was sitting in a folder on the table in front of him. It was a digital ghost that had come back to haunt him, to drag him down into the abyss. He tried to rally, to summon the last vestiges of his prosecutorial fire. "This is a gross violation of my privacy. A partisan fishing expedition." Privacy? Bongino's laugh was a bark, sharp and devoid of humor. "You forfeited your right to privacy when you used your public office to orchestrate a coup against a duly elected president. And this isn't a fishing expedition, Congressman. This is a harvest, and the crop is bountiful." He reached for a fourth recording device, its presence on the table an omen of yet more ruin. "But you didn't just conspire with the media and obstruct justice, did you, Adam? You brought your own family into it." Schiff's head snapped up, a flicker of genuine fear in his eyes. "Leave my family out of this," he snarled, the words a low growl. "I wish I could, Congressman," Bongino said, his voice laced with a cold, theatrical sympathy. "But you're the one who used them. You're the one who made your wife an accomplice to your crimes." He held up the recorder. "This is a particularly sad one, Adam. This is a call between you and your wife, Eve. You're discussing how to launder the payments you were receiving for your media coordination." "No," Schiff whispered, the word barely audible. It was a plea, a desperate final appeal to a man who had no mercy left to give. Bongino pressed play. Eve Schiff's voice, anxious and worried, filled the room. "Adam, I'm worried about these payments. $500,000 from that PAC. It looks suspicious. What if someone connects it to your committee work?" Schiff's recorded voice was smooth, reassuring, but utterly chilling in its casual criminality. "They won't, darling. Don't worry. The money is clean. It's been routed through 3 different shell corporations. Just keep billing them for strategic consulting. It's a standard arrangement. Nobody will ever look twice. Trust me." The recording ended. The image it painted was devastating. A husband calming his wife's fears as he knowingly implicated her in a felony. He had not only betrayed his country, he had betrayed the woman he supposedly loved, turning her into a pawn in his corrupt game. Schiff slumped in his chair, a broken man. The public humiliation was one thing. The exposure of this intimate familial corruption was another. It was a blow from which there was no recovery. He stared at Bongino, his eyes pleading, "Please, no more." But Bongino's face was a mask of grim determination. He reached for a second folder, this one even thicker than the first. Its cover was a stark, foreboding black. "More?" Bongino said, his voice a low growl. "Adam, we're just getting to the good part. We haven't even talked about the Ukraine whistleblower you invented from whole cloth. We haven't talked about the lies you told to the FISA court. We haven't talked about the treason." He gestured towards the main entrance of the committee room. "But don't take my word for it. I've brought a guest. Someone you told the American people for 3 years didn't exist." The heavy oak doors swung open, flanked by 2 stone-faced federal marshals. A man in his 40s, his face pale with terror, was escorted into the room. The moment Schiff saw him, his world, already collapsing, shattered into a million irreparable pieces. "Ladies and gentlemen," Bongino announced, his voice booming with theatrical flair, "meet Eric Ciaramella." The name fell into the room like a grenade, its detonation a wave of pure, concussive shock. Eric Ciaramella, the ghost in the machine, the faceless, nameless whistleblower whose complaint had plunged a nation into the trauma of impeachment. For years, his identity had been the most fiercely guarded secret in Washington, a name spoken only in hushed whispers and encrypted texts. To see him here, in the flesh, was like seeing a mythical creature step out of the shadows and into the harsh, unforgiving light of reality. The gallery erupted. Reporters, seasoned veterans who thought they were immune to surprise, were on their feet, shouting questions, their faces a mixture of disbelief and journalistic ecstasy. Democratic staffers who had built their careers on the foundation of Chiaramella's complaint scrambled for their phones, their faces ashen. This was not just a political earthquake. It was a seismic event that was leveling the entire landscape. Adam Schiff stared, his mind refusing to process what his eyes were seeing. It was impossible. Chiaramella was his creation, his asset. He was protected, insulated, buried under layers of classification and legal privilege. To see him here, under the custody of federal marshals, could mean only one thing. The conspiracy was not just unraveling, it had been completely and utterly compromised. "This is an outrage!" Schiff roared, finding his voice in a surge of desperate fury. He tried to stand, to project an authority he no longer possessed. "This man is a protected whistleblower. His identity is classified. You are endangering his life and violating the law." Bongino watched Schiff's tirade with the detached calm of a zookeeper observing a frantic animal in a cage. "It's hard to claim whistleblower protection, Congressman," he said, his voice cutting through the noise like a surgeon's scalpel. "When you were never a whistleblower to begin with, you were a co-conspirator." He turned his attention to the man at the witness table. Chiaramella was trembling, his hands shaking so violently he could barely adjust the microphone. He looked like a man being led to his own execution, but he also had the grim resolve of someone who had finally decided to tell the truth, no matter the cost. "Mr. Chiaramella," Bongino said, his tone softening, becoming almost gentle, "please tell the committee and the American people what really happened." Chiaramella took a deep, shuddering breath. When he spoke, his voice was thin and reedy, the sound of a man crushed by the weight of a terrible secret. "My name is Eric Chiaramella. I was a CIA analyst detailed to the National Security Council." He glanced at Schiff, a look of profound betrayal in his eyes. "In August of 2019, Congressman Schiff summoned me to a meeting. He said the Mueller investigation had failed to produce the desired result. He said they needed a new front, an insurance policy." "He's lying!" Schiff screamed, his voice cracking with panic. "He's been coerced. This testimony is inadmissible." Two marshals took a step closer to the dais, a silent warning. Bongino never took his eyes off Chiaramella. "Tell them about the meeting, Eric. Tell them what he asked you to do." It was at a discreet location, a private room at the Capitol Hill Club. Chiaramella continued, his voice gaining a small measure of strength. "He told me he had a plan to launch impeachment proceedings based on the president's phone call with Ukrainian President Zelensky. He said it was the only way to save democracy from a second Trump term. The specificity of the details was damning. This wasn't a vague accusation. It was a first-hand account. "I told him I hadn't heard the call," Chiaramella said, his voice dropping. "I only had second-hand and third-hand rumors, hallway gossip from other NSC staffers. I told him I couldn't file a complaint based on hearsay." He looked directly at Schiff, his gaze unwavering. "And do you know what he said?" He said, "That's the beauty of it, Eric. You don't have to. I'll write the complaint for you. I'll make it sound credible, official. All you have to do is sign your name to it." The room was dead silent. The accusation was monstrous. The chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, the man in charge of overseeing the nation's most sensitive secrets, had not just encouraged a whistleblower. He had fabricated one. He had authored the very complaint he would later claim to be investigating. "Eric," Bongino said softly, "did you, by any chance, happen to record these conversations?" Chiaramella nodded, a look of profound misery on his face. "I was terrified. I knew what he was asking me to do was illegal, that it was a perversion of the entire intelligence process. I started recording our meetings on my phone, for my own protection." Bongino gestured to an aide, who placed another small digital recorder on the witness table. "Let's play the recording from that first meeting at the Capitol Hill Club." He pressed play. The audio was slightly muffled, the background noise of a restaurant barely audible, but the voices were clear. Schiff's voice, smooth and persuasive. "Eric, think of it as a piece of theater. We need a hero, a patriot who was so disturbed by what he heard that he had to risk his career to come forward. That hero is you." Chiaramella's voice, hesitant and fearful. "But, Congressman, I didn't hear it. I would be lying to federal investigators." Schiff's laugh, a chilling, dismissive sound. "It's not a lie, Eric. It's a narrative. And right now, the country needs this narrative more than it needs the literal truth. This is about protecting the nation from a clear and present danger. Sometimes the greater good requires us to bend the rules." The recording ended, but the sickening sentiment lingered in the air. It's not a lie. It's a narrative. In that single phrase, Schiff's entire philosophy was laid bare. The truth was a malleable commodity, a tool to be shaped and wielded for political gain. Bongino let the silence stretch, allowing the weight of the words to crush Schiff's remaining credibility. "But he didn't just persuade you, did he, Eric?" Bongino asked, his voice turning hard. "What happened when you started to have doubts?" Chiaramella's face crumpled, the memory clearly a source of deep trauma. "He threatened me," he whispered. "Play the next one," Bongino commanded. This recording was a phone call, the quality crystal clear. Schiff's voice was no longer persuasive. It was cold, menacing, brutal. "Eric, let me be perfectly clear. You are a GS-14 CIA analyst. I am the chairman of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. I own your career. I own your security clearance. If you walk away from this, I will ensure you spend the rest of your professional life in a windowless basement office in Langley, alphabetizing old reports from the Cold War. I will leak to the press that you are unstable, a fabricator. Your career will be over. Your life as you know it will be over. Do you understand me?" Chiaramella's terrified whisper. "You're threatening me." Schiff's final devastating words. "No, Eric. I'm giving you a choice. You can be a hero who saved the Republic, or you can be a nobody who got crushed by the gears of history. File the complaint." Exactly as I wrote it. The room was a tomb. The man who had wrapped himself in the flag and proclaimed himself the defender of democracy had just been exposed in his own voice as a ruthless blackmailer, a thug who used the immense power of his office to threaten and coerce a subordinate into committing a federal crime. Schiff was no longer just a liar. He was a monster. The monster sat exposed in the center of the room, the label of his own making now branded on his soul. The recordings were more than just evidence. They were an autopsy of his character, peeling back the layers of public service to reveal the rot of tyranny beneath. Adam Schiff was hyperventilating, his breaths coming in short, ragged gasps. The air in the room seemed to have thinned, becoming a suffocating vacuum that offered no oxygen. His vision tunneled, the faces in the gallery blurring into a single accusatory mass. He was a drowning man, but the water filling his lungs was the sound of his own voice, his own damnation. Eric Chiaramella, his face streaked with tears, delivered the final emotional blow. "He destroyed my life," he said, his voice cracking with a pain that was raw and profound. "My wife left me. My children are bullied at school because their father was on television. Part of a lie. We received death threats. We had to move 3 times. I was a patriot. I served my country for 15 years, and he turned me into a villain, a pawn in his sick political game. All because I was too scared to say no." He looked at Schiff, not with hatred, but with a shattered, empty pity. "Was it worth it, Congressman? Was destroying my family worth it to get your headlines?" Schiff had no answer. He could only stare, his mind a maelstrom of denial and terror. Bongino, sensing the kill, moved to consolidate the evidence, transforming the emotional devastation into a cold, hard, factual indictment. He stood and walked to a large digital display that had been wheeled into the room. Ladies and gentlemen, while Mr. Chiaramella's testimony is powerful, the documentary evidence is irrefutable. On the screen, a timeline appeared, stark and linear. Bongino narrated it with the dispassionate precision of a homicide detective walking a jury through a crime scene. August 15, 2019. Congressman Schiff meets with Eric Ciaramella at the Capitol Hill Club. Here is the receipt for the private room, paid for with Schiff's congressional credit card. A $127 charge for strategic planning. A high-resolution image of the credit card statement filled the screen. August 16th. Schiff's official office calendar obtained via subpoena. A 3-hour block titled Ukraine Initiative. Internal staff emails show 4 of his top aides were assigned to draft the narrative. The emails appeared on screen, their subject lines damning. August 18th. The first draft of the whistleblower complaint is created on a House Intelligence Committee staffer's computer. We recovered the file from the server's backup cache. It is time-stamped at 9:47 p.m. The metadata of the Word document was displayed for all to see. August 20th. The second meeting, the phone call where Schiff threatens Chiaramella. Here are the cell tower records, placing both men's phones in the same location, cross-referenced with the audio recording you just heard. A map with pulsing dots appeared, a visual representation of the conspiracy. August 22nd. Eric Ciaramella officially files the complaint, using language that is a 98.7% verbatim match to the draft created in Congressman Schiff's office. The 2 documents were shown side by side, the identical phrases highlighted in yellow. And the final nail in the coffin, Bongino said, his voice dropping. August 23rd. Congressman Schiff goes on national television and, with a straight face, tells the American people he has had no contact with the whistleblower. A lie, a provable, documented, and now publicly exposed lie. Schiff's desperate, flailing defense was a pathetic spectacle. The timeline! It's taken out of context. I was performing my constitutional duty of oversight. Your duty. Bongino's voice boomed, filled with righteous fury. You had a duty to the truth. You had a duty to the American people you swore to serve. You didn't conduct oversight. You orchestrated a fraud. You manufactured a crisis to overturn an election you didn't like. That is not oversight, Congressman. That is a coup. The word hung in the air, as explosive as Chiaramella's name had been. Bongino wasn't finished. He strode back to the witness table and picked up a third folder, this one thicker than the previous 2 combined, bound in the severe black of a judge's robe. But this fraud, this conspiracy, was just the beginning. It was the predicate for your greatest crime against the Constitution. He looked directly at Schiff, his eyes burning with an intensity that seemed to pin the congressman to his chair. Round 3, Adam. Let's talk about what you did to the FISA court. Schiff's reaction was visceral. A low, guttural moan escaped his lips. The Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act Court, the most secret, most powerful, and most shielded court in the nation, an institution whose proceedings were so classified that even mentioning them in public was a potential felony. Bongino gestured to the large video monitor. Ordinarily, the proceedings of the FISA court are sacrosanct, but the chief presiding judge felt that the crimes committed in her courtroom were so egregious, so destructive to the rule of law, that she has taken the unprecedented step of agreeing to testify. The screen flickered to life. The image that appeared was that of a woman in her late 60s, her face framed by graying hair, her expression one of stern, unyielding authority. She wore the black robes of a federal judge. The nameplate before her read, "The Honorable Rosemary M. Collier, Presiding Judge, United States Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court." The room fell into a state of stunned, reverent silence. This was impossible. It was a constitutional crisis, and a history-making moment playing out in real time. A sitting FISA judge appearing publicly. It was the judicial equivalent of a nuclear bomb. Judge Collier's voice, clear and imbued with decades of judicial temperament, cut through the silence. "Mr. Schiff," she began, her gaze boring into him through the camera lens. "For 3 years, you have used the shield of national security to hide your crimes. Today, that shield is broken. You came into my chambers. You swore an oath before me, and you systematically lied to a federal judge to obtain warrants to spy on American citizens. You poisoned the well of justice, sir. And today, you will drink from it." Adam Schiff, the Harvard lawyer, the master prosecutor, looked at the face on the screen and finally understood. There was no escape. He had lied to the wrong judge. The face of Judge Rosemary Collier on the screen was like the face of judgment itself, impassive and absolute. For Adam Schiff, it was as if the marble statues of justice in the halls outside had come to life to condemn him. The FISA court was his secret weapon, the dark engine room of his power. It was a place of shadows and whispers, where the normal rules of evidence and adversarial process did not apply. He had treated it as his personal fiefdom, a rubber stamp for his political vendettas, never once imagining that its formidable secrecy could be turned against him. "Your Honor," he began, his voice a reedy, desperate plea, "the proceedings of this court are classified at the highest level. Your testimony here is a violation of the act itself." 3. Judge Collier's expression did not soften. Her voice was cold, precise, and utterly dismissive. "Mr. Schiff, I am well aware of the laws governing this court. I helped write some of them. Let me educate you. The shield of classification is intended to protect national security and the integrity of our intelligence methods. It is not, and was never intended to, provide cover for federal felonies being committed within my courtroom. When you perjured yourself before a federal judge, you forfeited that protection. The Department of Justice has authorized my testimony. The President has declassified all materials related to your abuse of this court. There is nowhere left for you to hide." Her words were a judicial sledgehammer, shattering his last desperate legal shield. Bongino, sensing his moment, stepped forward to guide the testimony. "Your Honor, could you please describe for the committee Congressman Schiff's first appearance before you regarding the Russia investigation?" Judge Collier consulted her notes, her demeanor that of a judge reading a verdict. "On March 15, 2017, Mr. Schiff appeared before me in a sealed session to request a surveillance warrant against a United States citizen, Carter Page. The primary evidence he presented was a dossier compiled by a former British intelligence officer, Christopher Steele." She looked up from her notes, her eyes locking onto Schiff's. Mr. Schiff swore under oath that the FBI and CIA had independently verified the dossier's contents. He described it as raw but credible intelligence from multiple corroborating sources. He knew that was a lie. We now have evidence that at the very moment he was swearing to its credibility, the CIA had already informed his committee that the dossier was, and I quote from their report, "an internet rumor mill and likely product of Russian disinformation." The revelation was stunning. He hadn't just presented weak evidence. He had presented evidence that his own intelligence agencies had already debunked, and then lied about it to a federal judge. "But it gets worse," Judge Collier continued, her voice tight with suppressed anger. "In a subsequent hearing on July 22, 2017, I expressed skepticism about the dossier's veracity. I asked Mr. Schiff directly if there was any information that might call into question the source's credibility. He looked at me and said, 'None, Your Honor.' He deliberately withheld the fact that Christopher Steele had been hired by the opposing political campaign and was, in his own words, desperate to see Donald Trump lose the election. That is exculpatory evidence, Mr. Schiff. Withholding it is a felony." Bongino then played another recording. The audio was pristine, clearly captured by the court's own secure recording system. It was from a closed session in the judge's chambers. Judge Collier's voice was audible, filled with doubt. "Congressman, this evidence is thin. It is based almost entirely on a single, unverified source. I am not comfortable signing a warrant to surveil an American citizen on this basis." Schiff's voice, dripping with condescension and a veiled threat, replied, "Your Honor, with all due respect, you are a judge, not an intelligence analyst. We are telling you this is a grave national security threat. The country is in danger. If the court is seen as an obstacle to protecting our democracy, then perhaps we need to reevaluate the court's composition. I have many colleagues in the Senate who feel it's time for new blood on the FISA bench." The recording ended. The implication was unmistakable. "Approve the warrants, or we will have you removed from your post." It was a direct threat against a sitting federal judge. "Threatening a federal judge is a crime, Mr. Schiff," Judge Collier said, her voice like ice. "Perjury before this court is a crime. Defrauding this court is a crime. You are not a public servant, sir. You are a serial felon who weaponized the most powerful tools of our intelligence community to spy on your political enemies." As if on cue, the main doors to the committee room opened once more. 3 individuals, 2 men and a woman, walked in. Their posture, their conservative attire, their watchful eyes, everything about them screamed career intelligence professionals. They walked to the witness table and stood side by side, a united front of silent condemnation. "Your Honor, Mr. Schiff did not act alone," Bongino announced. "He coerced patriotic intelligence officers into participating in his scheme." "Ma'am, would you please state your name for the record?" The woman, her face a mask of grim determination, spoke into the microphone. "My name is Sarah Henderson. I am a senior analyst at the CIA's Russia desk. For 2 years, Congressman Schiff repeatedly ordered me and my team to alter our intelligence assessments to fit his political narrative. When we refused, he threatened our careers, our clearances, and even our families." The man next to her spoke, his voice shaking with rage. "Colonel James Mitchell, Defense Intelligence Agency, 26 years of service to this nation. Adam Schiff asked me to create fake intelligence, to reverse engineer a scenario showing Russian collusion. He said, and I quote, 'The American people need to see the evidence, even if we have to create it for them.' I have never in my entire career been given such a treasonous order." Bongino let their testimony hang in the air. Then he turned back to the large screen. "And who were the targets of these illegal, fraudulent warrants? Who did Chairman Schiff spy on?" A list of names began to scroll down the screen. It was a horrifying collection of American citizens, journalists, political commentators, sitting members of Congress, private citizens, Tucker Carlson, Sean Hannity, Senator Rand Paul, Congressman Jim Jordan, dozens and dozens of names, all of them prominent critics of Schiff and his party. He had used the awesome power of the state to conduct opposition research on his enemies. "Stop it!" Schiff shrieked, his voice a raw, desperate cry. "That's classified information." "Not anymore," Bongino said calmly. "The president declassified it all this morning. The American people have a right to know that their government was turned into a secret police force. And you, Mr. Schiff, were its chief." Schiff was rocking back and forth in his chair, his hands covering his face. He was muttering to himself, a frantic, incoherent litany of denials. He was no longer a congressman. He was a patient, a man who had suffered a complete and catastrophic break from reality. The man who saw himself as the protector of the Republic had become its greatest enemy. The list of names on the screen was a testament to his hubris. An honor roll of the very democracy he claimed to be protecting, now revealed as his personal hit list. Each name was a citizen he had wronged, a constitutional right he had violated. Adam Schiff looked at the scrolling list and saw not just political opponents, but the ghosts of a republic he had tried to murder in the dark. His mind, once a sharp and intricate weapon, was now a shattered ruin. He felt a crushing pressure in his chest, a physical manifestation of his disgrace. I need a doctor," he wheezed, clutching at his tie as if it were a noose. Paramedics, who had been on standby in the corridor, rushed into the room. They surrounded him, their movements efficient and practiced, checking his pulse, his blood pressure, their calm professionalism a stark contrast to the chaos of his inner world. As they worked, Bongino addressed the room, his voice resonating with the cold, hard finality of a verdict. "We will take a brief recess to allow the congressman to receive medical attention. But let me be clear to everyone watching. We are not done." He gestured to the witness table, where several more thick, ominous folders lay unopened. "When we return, we will move from the abuse of power to outright treason. We will present evidence of financial corruption that will shock the conscience of this nation. We have bank records from Swiss accounts. We have testimony from captured foreign intelligence officers. We have evidence that this man, Adam Schiff, was not just a partisan zealot. He was a paid asset of the Chinese Communist Party." Schiff, now being helped onto a stretcher, heard those words. Through the fog of his panic, the word Chinese cut through like a shard of ice to his heart. It was the one secret he believed was truly buried, a crime so profound, so monstrous, that he had convinced himself it could never see the light of day. As the paramedics wheeled him out of the room, his eyes locked with Bongino's. In that final, silent exchange, Schiff's look of terror was met with an expression of pure, unyielding resolve. 30 minutes later, a paler, visibly diminished Adam Schiff was wheeled back into the committee room. His lawyers, a phalanx of grim-faced men in expensive suits, flanked his wheelchair. He had been stabilized, but his essence was broken. The fight was gone, replaced by a hollow, haunted resignation. "Welcome back, Congressman," Bongino said, his tone devoid of any genuine concern. "I'm glad you're feeling well enough to continue, because now we get to the heart of the matter. We get to the money." Another large monitor was brought into the room. This time it displayed the sterile gray interior of a federal supermax prison interview room. Seated at a metal table was a man in an orange jumpsuit. He was shackled, but his posture was ramrod straight, his expression one of arrogant disdain. "Congressman Schiff," Bongino announced, "I'd like you to say hello to an old friend of yours. This is Mr. Chen Wei, a former deputy director of China's Ministry of State Security. He was apprehended last month attempting to exfiltrate another asset from U.S. soil. He has been very cooperative." Schiff's reaction was a jolt of pure horror. "This is absurd. You can't use the testimony of a captured communist spy. It's coerced nonsense, propaganda." The man on the screen, Chen Wei, laughed. It was a dry, rasping sound. His English was precise, with only a faint accent. "Hello, Cardinal," he said, the use of the code name sending a fresh wave of shock through the room. "Did you truly believe your handlers in Beijing would not keep meticulous records of our most valuable American asset?" "Cardinal!" The name dripped with intimacy and betrayal. Chen continued, his tone that of a bureaucrat reviewing a file. "We first identified Adam Schiff in 2016. He was perfect, arrogant, easily flattered, and consumed by a pathological hatred of his political opponents. We began by feeding his ego, providing him with disinformation that he eagerly consumed and disseminated because it fit his preconceived narrative. He was, as you Americans say, a useful idiot." Chen Wei smiled thinly. But by 2017, he graduated. He became a fully conscious, paid asset. We gave him the code name Cardinal because of his fondness for red ties. It amused "This is a lie. A performance for a reduced sentence," Schiff shouted, his voice thin and reedy. Chen Wei's smile vanished. "A lie?" Shall we discuss the $2.5 million we funneled to your wife's art gallery? A gallery that suddenly began selling mediocre landscape paintings for $100,000 apiece to anonymous Chinese buyers. A brilliant money laundering scheme, we thought. So very creative. As Chen spoke, bank records and wire transfers flashed onto the screen next to his face. The transactions were undeniable. A digital breadcrumb trail leading directly from shell corporations linked to the Chinese MSS to Eve Schiff's gallery accounts. Or, perhaps, Chen continued, his voice dripping with contempt, we should talk about the tuition for your children. Harvard and Stanford are very expensive. We paid for it, over $1 million. We considered it an investment in your family's future. And in return, you gave us America's future. Bongino's team, working with live data from the Treasury Department, projected a summary onto the screen. Agent Rodriguez, Bongino said to a woman at a terminal, "What's the grand total?" "Sir, we have confirmed over $15 million in payments from sources linked to Chinese intelligence to accounts directly or indirectly controlled by the Schiff family since 2017, she announced. But the real money, Bongino said, his voice dropping, was in Switzerland. A Credit Suisse statement appeared on screen. Account number 784991C47, registered to a shell corporation named Pacific Strategic Outlook, with Adam Schiff listed as the sole beneficial owner. The balance, displayed in stark, bold numbers, was staggering. $47,132,119. You sold your country, Adam, Bongino said, his voice a low, furious whisper. You sold out every man, woman, and child in this nation for a Swiss bank account and a mansion in Potomac. The final piece of evidence was an audio recording. This was intercepted by the NSA 2 days ago, Bongino explained. It is a call from Congressman Schiff to a handler at the Chinese embassy in Washington, D.C. Schiff's voice, frantic and terrified, filled the room. They know. Bongino has everything. You have to get me out. I'm invoking the extraction protocol. The Chinese voice was cold and pragmatic. Calm yourself, Cardinal. Your extraction is contingent on one final task. There is a witness, a Navy SEAL who survived the South China Sea incident. He is scheduled to testify. He cannot be allowed to speak. You must silence him. Permanently. A long pause. Then Schiff's whispered, horrifying reply. Understood. Consider it done. The room erupted. This was no longer about lies or corruption. This was conspiracy to commit murder on behalf of a hostile foreign power. It was the deepest, darkest form of treason imaginable. The words, "Consider it done," echoed in the chamber. A death sentence delivered in a conspiratorial whisper. It was the sound of a man's final moral collapse, the point of no return where political ambition curdled into a plot to murder an American hero. The air crackled with a mixture of horror and outrage. Adam Schiff, the self-proclaimed guardian of democracy, had just been unmasked as a would-be assassin in the service of a communist regime. His lawyers, who had been stoically enduring the onslaught, now looked at their client with expressions of pure shock. They were high-priced defenders of the elite, accustomed to navigating scandals and corruption. But this was different. This was a line they had never imagined their client would cross. One of them leaned in and whispered frantically in Schiff's ear, but the congressman seemed catatonic, his eyes wide and vacant, staring into a future that had just been reduced to a concrete cell. Bongino let the weight of the murder conspiracy settle over the room before delivering the final devastating act of his presentation. His voice, when he spoke again, had lost its prosecutorial edge and taken on a somber, almost reverent tone. For our final round, I want to introduce you to the real cost of Adam Schiff's treason. Not in dollars, but in blood. The great oak doors at the rear of the chamber swung open. The sound that followed was not the shuffle of lawyers or the click of cameras, but the slow, rhythmic cadence of a man on crutches. Each step was a testament to his pain and his resilience. He was a Navy SEAL, his dress uniform immaculate despite the prosthetic leg visible below his right knee. His face was a mask of controlled fury, his eyes burning with a fire that could have melted steel. Behind him, a solemn procession of Gold Star families entered, mothers and fathers, wives and children, their faces etched with a grief that was timeless and profound. They carried framed photographs of their fallen sons, husbands, and fathers. They took their seats in the front rows of the gallery, a silent jury of the bereaved. "Ladies and gentlemen," Bongino announced, his voice thick with emotion, "please show your respect for Petty Officer First Class Marcus Rodriguez of the United States Navy SEALs." Rodriguez made his way to the witness table, refusing any offer of help. He settled himself in the chair, placed his crutches beside him, and adjusted the microphone with a steady hand. He looked not at the committee, not at the cameras, but directly at Adam Schiff. It was a gaze of pure, unadulterated hatred. "On March 23, 2021, Rodriguez began, his voice a low, steady growl, "my team was sent on a mission codenamed Operation Neptune's Thunder. Our objective was to intercept a Chinese spy vessel in the South China Sea that was attempting to recover a downed American drone. We were told it was a routine snatch and grab, high risk, but standard." He paused, his jaw tightening. "It wasn't standard. It was a slaughter. They were waiting for us. They knew our insertion vector, our numbers, our communications frequencies, even the names of our point men. It was a perfectly prepared kill box." The room was utterly silent, captivated by the raw power of his testimony. "3 of my brothers died on the deck of that ship," Rodriguez said, his voice cracking for the first time. He reached into his uniform pocket and pulled out 3 worn photographs, laying them side by side on the table before him. Petty Officer James Jimmy Mitchell. He was 26. His wife had just had their first baby. Petty Officer David Chano Chen, 24 years old. He was the funniest guy I ever knew. And Petty Officer Robert Big Rob Williams, 28. He was the rock of our team. The faces of the 3 fallen SEALs appeared on the large screen, young, smiling, immortalized in their prime. The quiet sobs of their families in the gallery were the only sound. "I held Jimmy in my arms as he bled out," Rodriguez continued, his voice now a choked whisper. "He looked up at me, and his last words were, 'How, Marcus? How did they know?' I didn't have an answer for him then." The SEAL lifted his head, his eyes locking with Schiff's once more. "But I have an answer now. They knew because you told them, Congressman. You took the operational plan for Neptune's Thunder, a document so secret that only 12 people in the entire U.S. government had access to it, and you sold it to the Chinese. You traded my brothers' lives for money." Bongino stepped forward, his face a grim mask. "The operational plan was distributed to the President, the Secretary of Defense, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and the Chairman of the House and Senate Intelligence Committees. That's it. 12 men." He pointed a trembling finger at Schiff. "You were one of them, and you were the leak." Soon, on the screen, captured Chinese military documents appeared, showing the American battle plan in meticulous detail. Next to it, White House Situation Room security footage played, showing Adam Schiff alone after a briefing, brazenly photographing pages of a classified document with his personal cell phone. The betrayal was absolute, the evidence irrefutable. An admiral in full dress uniform stood from the gallery. "Deputy Director, if I may," he said, his voice booming with authority. "What this man did was worse than one mission. He sold them the blueprints to our Virginia-class nuclear submarines, the crown jewels of our naval defense. In the last 18 months, 3 of our submarines, the USS Hartford, the USS Connecticut, and the USS Virginia, have gone missing on patrol. We now know they were hunted and sunk by Chinese submarines built with our own stolen technology. That's 401 American sailors, Mr. Schiff. 401 souls. Their blood is on your hands. The mothers and wives in the gallery were openly weeping now, their grief a terrible, piercing sound. One woman cried out, "My son was on the Hartford. He was just a boy." The committee room doors burst open with a violent crash. A team of federal marshals, led by a stern-faced commander, marched into the room holding a single, official-looking document. "Adam Bennett Schiff," the lead marshal bellowed, his voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. "You are under arrest for violations of the Espionage Act, conspiracy to commit murder, and high treason against the United States of America." Schiff's final collapse was total. A strangled, inhuman sound escaped his lips as he slumped sideways in his wheelchair, his body convulsing. The paramedics rushed back in, but it was too late for medical intervention. This was a collapse of the soul. As the marshals surrounded him, reading him his rights, the cuffs were produced. The sharp, metallic click as they locked around his wrists was the sound of justice, the final punctuating note in the symphony of his downfall. The man who had put a nation on trial had finally been judged himself. The click of the handcuffs was the sound of a world breaking. It was the sound of a powerful man's final, irrevocable severance from freedom and influence. As the federal marshals lifted the now limp form of Adam Schiff from his wheelchair onto a gurney, the room remained in a state of suspended animation, a tableau of stunned disbelief. The man who had lectured a nation on patriotism, who had wrapped himself in the fabric of the Constitution only to tear it to shreds, was now a federal prisoner. His legacy was reduced to a single damning word: traitor. His eyes, wide with a terror that transcended politics, darted around the room, seeking an escape that did not exist. They fell upon the Gold Star families, their faces a mixture of profound grief and grim vindication. They fell upon Marcus Rodriguez, who stood tall on his one good leg, a living monument to the lives Schiff had sold. Finally, they fell upon Dan Bongino, who stood watching, his expression not of triumph, but of solemn, weary duty. As they wheeled the disgraced congressman toward the exit, his expensive suit now rumpled, his signature burgundy tie askew, Bongino stepped forward to address the cameras. His voice was a low, powerful current that commanded the attention of the nation. "Today, justice has been served," he began, his voice resonating with the moral authority he had earned. "But what we have witnessed here is more than the fall of one corrupt man. It is the exposure of a sickness, a cancer that has been growing in the heart of our republic. For years, this man and his enablers in the media and in the halls of power positioned themselves as our moral superiors. They told us they were defending democracy, while they worked in the shadows to subvert it." He gestured toward the empty chair where Schiff had sat. "They lied to you. They spied on you. They conspired to overturn your vote. And when they were caught, they sold your secrets and your sons to our enemies to cover their tracks. They believed they were untouchable, a protected class above the law that governs the rest of us." His voice rose, filled with a righteous anger that spoke for millions. "Let the events of today be a warning to every corrupt politician, every compromised bureaucrat, every media talking head who chose narrative over truth. We see you. The American people see you. Your time is up." The trial of Adam Bennett Schiff was not a trial in the conventional sense. It was a formality, a procedural epilogue to a story whose ending had already been written in the indelible ink of his own recorded words. The evidence was so absolute, so comprehensive, that his high-priced legal team, facing a mountain of audio, video, and financial data, could offer no defense. They advised him to plead guilty, to accept a deal to spare himself the spectacle of a death penalty trial. He refused. In a final, pathetic act of defiance born of a narcissism that even total ruin could not extinguish. He chose to face a military tribunal. The proceedings were swift and brutal. One by one, the witnesses from the hearing returned. Eric Ciaramella, Judge Rosemary Collier, the CIA analysts, and the Gold Star families. Their testimony, now entered into a formal court record, painted a portrait of a man whose corruption was bottomless. The final witness was Petty Officer Marcus Rodriguez, who stood before the panel of military judges and, in a voice devoid of all emotion, recounted the deaths of his brothers. He did not look at Schiff. He did not need to. The verdict was a foregone conclusion. Guilty on all 47 counts: treason, espionage, conspiracy to commit murder. The sentence was delivered without ceremony. Life in prison without the possibility of parole, to be served at ADX Florence, the federal supermax facility reserved for the nation's most dangerous traitors and terrorists. His name would become a byword for betrayal, a cautionary tale whispered in the halls of power for generations to come. His family's assets, every dollar traced back to Chinese blood money, were seized. The Potomac Mansion was sold, its proceeds used to create a fund for the children of the 401 sailors who perished on the submarines he had compromised. His wife, Eve, facing her own charges for money laundering, cooperated fully, her testimony painting a sad picture of a woman who chose willful blindness over moral courage. The political and media establishment that had enabled him continued to crumble. Within 6 months, 17 members of Congress implicated in the wider conspiracy had resigned in disgrace. The leadership of the Democratic National Committee was swept out, replaced by a new generation desperate to cleanse the stain of treason. CNN and MSNBC, their credibility shattered, saw their ratings plummet to historic lows. Their parent companies, facing shareholder revolts and advertiser boycotts, initiated a brutal house cleaning, firing dozens of executives, producers, and on-air personalities who had been complicit in the Schiff narrative. A new era of journalistic skepticism was born from the ashes of their self-immolation. Dan Bongino, against his own protestations, was confirmed as the new director of the FBI. His first act was not to hold a press conference, but to fly to the homes of the Gold Star families of Operation Neptune's Thunder. He met with them privately, away from the cameras, and listened to their stories. He promised them that the FBI would never again serve the powerful, but would forever serve the people. His reforms of the Bureau were swift and decisive. He fired hundreds of politically motivated agents and administrators, dismantled the corrupt 7th floor, and instituted a new mandatory ethics curriculum based on a simple principle: follow the evidence, no matter where it leads. Public trust in the FBI, once at an all-time low, began a slow and steady climb. America began to heal, but it was the healing of a body that had survived a near-fatal disease. The scar tissue was a permanent reminder of the vulnerability of democracy, of how easily the institutions of freedom could be turned into instruments of tyranny. Federal prisoner number 47291, Adam Schiff, spent 23 hours a day in a soundproof 7 by 12-foot concrete cell. The Harvard lawyer who had once commanded the nation's attention now had no one to talk to. The master manipulator who had plotted in the shadows now lived under the perpetual glare of fluorescent lights. He had no access to news, no contact with the outside world. His only view was a 4-inch-wide slit of a window showing a sliver of the Colorado sky. He was a ghost in his own life, a man erased from the world he had tried to rule. 6 months after the hearing that shook the world, Director Dan Bongino stood before a graduating class of new FBI agents at Quantico. His speech was not broadcast, but it would become the creed of a new generation of law enforcement. "Look at the man you see on the wall of shame," he told them, gesturing to a newly hung picture of Adam Schiff. "Do not remember him as a monster. Remember him as a warning, A warning about what happens when ambition goes unchecked, when ego replaces duty, and when the pursuit of power becomes more important than the pursuit of truth. He believed he was smarter than the system. He believed the rules didn't apply to him. He was wrong. No one is above the law. Not a congressman, not a senator, and not an FBI agent. Never forget that. His final words resonated with the weight of all that had been lost and all that had been saved. The battle for the soul of this nation is never over. It is fought every day in the choices you make, in the integrity you uphold. Go out there and be worthy of the trust that has been placed in you. Go out there and defend the Republic. Smash that like button. Subscribe for more stories of justice. And never ever stop fighting for the truth.